Very good. Everything seems to be working fine. And do type into the chat box where you are dialing in from to my original question, so we can all see how geographically diverse the audience is. That would be great. Italy, Estonia, Warsaw, Spain, Madrid. Where else? Greece. Excellent. Belgium. We do our usual competition. Who's coming in from the furthest away? Canary Islands. So far the winner. Okay. Anyone else from outside of Europe? Anywhere else? For now, it seems to be at least those who are typing in are mostly based in European countries. And that's great. A warm welcome, and thank you very much for being here. And I'll get started and making sure that the sound and the image works fine. Hopefully on our end, we do everything that we need to do. On your end, if there's any trouble, it might be individual. Restarting the browser usually fixes the issue. Other than that, we are making all the resources available. And if there's any big trouble, then you can always follow up with us individually. And my colleagues, Lenke and Veronica, are there in the back helping you and assisting with any question. So with that, let's get into it. You might know my background. I used to work for different EU institutions at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg and the European Commission, with a brief stint at the European Parliament as well. So I'll try to bring you that expertise and that perspective. And I've been dealing with EPSO exams and the EU process for many years now, also as the ultimate training with our team. So as I said, in case you missed something, everything will be in your inbox very shortly after the event, along with the presentation, and then a transcript a couple days later, and the presentation as well. But obviously, you are here at the live session, which gives you the great benefit of asking questions live, so I can tailor my presentation to your interest and to your needs, and I can answer all your questions to the best of my abilities, time permitting. If there are questions that I couldn't answer, then we'll follow up with a note, or we'll find a way to get back to you and make sure no question is left unanswered. With that, a few words about EU training. You might know about our services, our community. So we are the market leader when it comes to EU selection, preparation, and jobs. So we have a beautiful 100,000 odd community. Many thousands of those are already EU officials, which we're very, very proud of, that we could help you master the exams and pass the selection process. On Facebook, we are very present with a huge community as well. And there you can ask your peers, competitors, friends, and colleagues about the exams, about rumors, about preparation, resources, and best practices. And then we're happy to offer a huge number of resources, preparation resources, a question database of 25,000 questions. We have questions in 19 languages, and that is something that can prove very beneficial given the language diversity of the various EPSO competitions. And then many questions have been used, and there you have lots of webinars similar to this one, both on information and the process and preparation ideas, but also methodologies to master abstract reasoning, verbal reasoning, the language comprehension test or the assessment center, and different aspects of the exam. So with that, we are going to make available a special exclusive offer for those of you who are brave and consistent enough to stay at the live session today until the end. So that's going to be a special discount code that we make available for all our online products. So with that, please ask questions, whether it's technical, whether it's related to the preparation ideas or best practices, whether it's anything related to the competition. I'll be very happy to answer it. If I cannot, I will truthfully and honestly tell you, not the least because of legal disclaimers that obviously we tell you everything to the best of our knowledge and based on all the official sources that we have available. But the true number one source for official information is always EPSO, and then the selection board communication that is made available to you through your EPSO profile. So with that, let's get into this competition, Proofreaders ASD3 level. which I'm going to say a few words about what that actually means in practical administrative terms, where you would be in the EU's administrative bureaucratic system in terms of salary and other aspects. Perhaps the first most relevant practical question is, where would you work once you succeed in the competition and eventually you are recruited as an ASD3 proofreader? Well, the place of work for this particular competition is Luxembourg, which means that even if you are currently based in Brussels or you would need to move from a different country, well, the destination is Luxembourg and no other place for this particular competition. You might be wondering, if you actually get hired and you start working at the European Parliament or start working at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, could you at one point relocate, or could you at one point work elsewhere, perhaps in the same job, but perhaps in a couple of years in a different job? Technically, administratively, this is possible. So after 2, 3 or so years, you can keep your salary, you can keep your status, and you can move into another place of work within the EU institutional setup, or perhaps even into another job profile. But obviously, you are interested in being a proofreader, so that's your main objective right now. And again, place of work at the time of recruitment is going to be Luxembourg. What will you actually do? So you probably have that expertise, you know what proofreaders actually do. Now, what does that mean in the EU context? So we have as a source of information the notice of competition. So what they tell you about it is the following, what you can see on the screen. Basically, you'll perform linguistic tasks, pretty self-evident, and including executive and technical duties. So that means you would assist perhaps translators, you would assist perhaps policymakers, you would assist perhaps lawyers in their drafting of various documents, of all sorts of documents that the EU deals with. Now, at the Court of Justice, this is essentially judgments and various other forms of official documents. And at the European Parliament, it's as diverse as it gets, from resolutions, from legislative drafts, from reports, and often internal documents as well. And certainly in the language of the competition. And the language is something we'll come back to in a moment. And then proofreading manuscript, checking translated text for consistency. So linguistic and grammar and style consistency. And then prepare and check proofs before publication. So this is, I think, the core task of a proofreader in any settings, not just in the EU as such. And then you check for coherence, you check for unity, you check for compliance, uniformity with the style guide and the rules of the institutions. Obviously, all institutions, or the EU as a whole, has a style guide, and that's something that you might want to look up. You might want to just take a look, just a little bit familiarize yourself with the way they work. And I don't know actually whether it's based on the Economist style guide or it's based on some other journalistic or publishing house style guides. I'm sure there a lot of work has gone into it to make sure that the documents, both in form, in content, in style, in fluidity of the text, all of that is consistent across the board. It's a massive undertaking if you think about the EU's 24 official languages and the great variation of texts and those who draft those texts, and keeping it in a relatively consistent manner across the institutions, policy areas, and languages. Now, what else would you need to do? Terminology. So obviously terminology, making sure that one word is used consistently throughout the language variations and policy areas, and then making sure that some new terms are translated in a consistent way throughout a document, whether it's a judgment, whether it's a press release, or any form of document. So with that, let's look at the number of positions available and the languages that are being offered. So as you probably know, that there are 6 languages currently being advertised, 6 languages in which you can take the competition, and you must choose one of them. So you cannot choose two. You cannot combine any of these. You must choose one of the 6. And that choice has to be final for the sake of this particular competition. The language choice is relatively flexible because it's no longer linked to the passport you hold. So if you happen to be an Estonian citizen who grew up in the UK and currently you're living in Spain, I mean, all of these factors are somewhat irrelevant to your language choice. And I say somewhat because there are some formal rules that you need to consider, and we're going to go through those in a moment. What truly matters is how well you master a given language, and in which language did you obtain your diploma? High school certificate, or the degree that gives you access to post-secondary education, and then that post-secondary education, meaning a university degree, a bachelor degree, typically a 3-year bachelor degree, in which language did you conduct your studies? So those have an impact, but the passport that you hold or how many years you actually lived in a given country, that those are not factors that matter, which is good, right? So if you master a language and you have obtained a degree in that language and you have professional experience in that language, it really doesn't matter your past, so to say, and really doesn't matter which country's citizen you are, well, as long as you have an EU passport. That is obviously a formal requirement. You need to have an EU passport. So you can choose any of these 6 languages for the sake of consistency: Estonian, Greek, Irish, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. And for each language, there's a different number of places on the reserve list. Reserve list meaning those candidates who passed all the phases, all steps in the competition, are placed on the reserve list. And from the reserve list, you are recruitable. You need to be on the reserve list in order to be hired by one of the EU institutions, or in this particular case, we know upfront it's the European Parliament or the European Court of Justice. So that's the formal rule. If you are in a position that you can choose from multiple languages because you truly master it on a native level, maybe your mom is Italian and your dad is Portuguese and you just speak both languages fluently, well, it's entirely up to you to evaluate your chances and do a bit of numerical reasoning already at this point and trying to optimize your chances, find the best possible scenario. Incidentally, I got a question from a friend of mine who was asking about the language combinations similarly to what I just described. And it was in a different competitions context, but the question is applicable right here. She knows 4 languages, which is pretty impressive. And she knows 3 of them really well, but 1 of them less well. So she was asking if the one that she knows a bit less well, that's French. So she was wondering, should I actually choose French and by the time of the exam, I'm going to speak it well enough or write and communicate it well enough? Because perhaps knowing French is more important and that will increase the likelihood of me getting hired in the end. Or should I just focus on languages that I know really well right now and later mention that my French is already far better by the time of the competition ends, and that might have an impact on my employability. And my suggestion was choose a language that you really master right now, because you want to focus on passing the exam first and foremost. And only once you are in the reserve list, you want to focus on actually getting a job. So pick a language. If you have that liberty, the luxury of speaking multiple languages to that extent, pick one in which you can truly excel and the one in which you can pass the competition with the greatest likelihood. So with that, I see that there are 2 questions coming in, so I'll pause here for a second and take a look at those. So working for an EU institution, is there any possibility for smart work from home? Well, that's a very good question, not exactly related to this competition, but generally, if you're an EU official, how flexibly can you work from home? Now, before the pandemic, this was somewhat limited, Occasionally, for the confidentiality of the documents, that you perhaps had to be in a secure IT and physical environment. Perhaps you had just limited access to certain documents, again, because of the sensitive nature of the documents you may have been dealing with. Now, given the situation around the pandemic, I'm sure these rules have massively changed, and these are currently temporary. But chances are they're going to stay in one shape or form even when the pandemic subdues. So there's, well, I can't say certainly, but I see a very, very strong likelihood that even when the pandemic is somewhat managed / over in a few months, or who knows, even then, you will have more opportunities to work from home or from a flexible environment and not needing to go into the office. But still, you probably would need to be in the office a couple of days a week, or perhaps every second week. There could be these sort of arrangements. Now, living in another country and then commuting to Luxembourg, I don't yet know. I honestly cannot tell you anything meaningful in that regard. Maybe. But again, from perspective of organizing work and again with confidentiality, group coordination, teamwork, and a host of other challenges, it's yet to be seen. But again, it's not excluded because the pandemic has really triggered a bit of a mindset shift. Question number 2, would a master diploma from Spain, bachelor from another country, allow me to enter the competition in the Spanish language profile? So BA from another country, but a master's diploma from Spain. Okay, for the Spanish. I presume yes. Again, I wouldn't say that with 100% certainty, but I presume yes, because that's a diploma, even if it's not the foundational degree that you got, because that's from another country, but you got a degree in Spanish and you want to enroll in the Spanish competition. So I presume that would qualify you for that. You might want to check that with the selection board, making sure that you are not disqualified for lack of compliance with the rules. All right, I see there are a couple other questions. We'll come back to those, but let me move back to the presentation itself before that. Application deadline, pretty straightforward, 23rd of March. So there's still more than a month until then. Make sure you don't leave the application to the last moment. You actually sign up a couple of days before, you fill out everything you need to fill out, and you double check the profile, you tick the right boxes, and you do everything you need to, not in the last moment. But again, you still have quite a bit of time until then. Eligibility. This is a really important part of the competition. It has a broad formal part and perhaps a less formal, more individual part to it. So what is the formal, the general conditions? What are the general conditions you need to meet in order to be eligible? Pretty straightforward. You have the 3 prerequisites that you see on the screen. So you must have an EU citizenship. You need to have completed the military service if that is obligatory and required in your country. And there aren't many European countries anymore where this is a prerequisite for many citizens. And then you need to meet the character requirements of the job. So if you have a criminal record, that might be a problem. Other than that, I haven't actually met cases when somebody would be rejected based on this particular criterion. So maybe if you have some employment history with the institutions because you were a temporary agent and they let you go because of some disciplinary action, who knows? I don't know if that might fit under this heading, but typically this doesn't cause any trouble for candidates. And then the more interesting, or perhaps the more personal aspect of the eligibility is choosing a language and the language rules, and not just the language, but as we heard from the previous question, which degree did you get and in which language did you get that particular degree? So basically you need to choose a language one of the 6 languages that we have seen on the screen, and it has to be C2 level. I never know what C2, but it's basically fluent, mother tongue level. So you need to be absolutely fluent in that particular language. And I say mother tongue level, it's complete fluency, understanding the grammar rules, being able to draft documents without any mistake. Really, you need to master that particular language. And then you have language 2, which needs to be English or French. And obviously different from language 1, but in this case, we don't need to emphasize that because none of the 6 languages you can choose is English or French. So you choose a language 1 from one of the 6, and then English or French. And then language 1 and language 2 must be different, so that's pretty straightforward. Qualifications. So which qualifications do you have? And this is where it gets a little tricky, but not too tricky. It's fairly standard the way they present the formal qualifications you need to meet. There are 2 options. Option number 1 is basically having a post-secondary diploma, so a university degree attested by a diploma. So you have a university degree plus a minimum of 3 years relevant work experience. So relevant, I say relevant, but let me quote directly, in a field directly related to the nature of the duties described in the notice of competition. So you need to have worked at least 3 years in a job that is fully comparable to the tasks that you will be required to perform as an EU official proofreader. Option number 2, before I get there, another important aspect of this is it has the language aspect to it. So the diploma and the professional experience need to have been in or need to be in a language that you chose as language 1. So if you choose Estonian, your diploma and your 3 years relevant experience need to have been conducted, performed, obtained in Estonian. So that's a very important aspect. And to the previous question, again, my presumption was having a second diploma, basically a master's degree in Spanish, and having 3 years of Spanish proofreading work experience would qualify you. But then again, given the difference between a bachelor and a master's, I probably would be cautious to the extent that I would ask the selection board for their view. And then if this is not the case, then the diploma giving access to the post-secondary education, so basically your high school degree, essentially, it must have been gained in the chosen language of the competition. Yeah, so your high school degree must have been in the language of the competition. So there's a bit of variation there. So if you went to high school in one country, but then you did your university degree in another, there's a bit of margin, a bit of leeway to play around that. But again, making sure you have all the official documents and everything is properly issued in a given language, and there is no misunderstanding there. And then in terms of qualifications, this is the actual option number 2, where you have a degree, in basically any studies. So it doesn't have to be relevant to the competition. You have a university degree, and you have 6 years of experience, of which 3 needs to be relevant to the competition, right? So I'm sorry, I need to backtrack it because I a little bit mixed it up. So to make sure that I'm clear on the rules, and what you see here in the notice of competition, make sure that's the right one. So actually, this option number 2, the one I just described, actually, it's not about the university degree. It's about a high school degree, right? So you basically have a degree that gives you access to university studies, but you don't need to have those university studies. So it's essentially a secondary education attested by a diploma. So no university bachelor or master's in this scenario. Just to be sure, I explain the right rules to you. And then you have 6 years of work experience, of which 3 are relevant. So 6 years experience and 3 years relevant to the nature of the duties of the competition. Yeah, And again, diploma and professional experience need to have been gained in a language that is relevant to the competition, that is the language that you chose as language 1. So hopefully that's clear. Let me pause here for a second. I see many questions are coming in, and I'll ask or I'll answer a couple of those. So one of them is, are all candidates from the reserve list recruitable, or just some of them? Well, all candidates who are listed on the reserve list can be recruited. So once your name appears on the reserve list, because you passed all the different stages of the competition, you can be hired by, legally speaking, any of the EU institutions. Practically speaking, this competition is for 2 institutions, so those 2 will be the ones who will hire you. Will everyone from the reserve list be hired? Probably no. And that might be a little surprising / intimidating or disappointing, but some candidates end up on the reserve list and for whatever reason, they decide not to take a job. That might happen because their life circumstances have changed, because of their personal reasons, or they moved to another continent, who knows? So it doesn't mean that everybody from the reserve list will be recruited, and that's why there's a bit of margin that the institutions take into account. If they need 15 people, they might say we need 18 on the reserve list, because that roughly 10%, well, with such small numbers, 20%, may not actually be hired. But I've seen statistics, and over 90% of those on the reserve list actually get to be hired. So once you're there and you do have a strong intent, desire to be hired, sooner or later, you almost certainly will be. And by the way, we have a webinar that is called How to Get an EU Job Once You Are on the Reserve List. So make sure to check that out once you get there. And there I share lots of ideas and tips on what you can do on your end to be hired as quickly as possible. Next question. Can one be recruited elsewhere, like in Brussels, if successful candidate? I'm already an official, but in ASD, SC, so secretary grade. Well, as I said at the beginning, legally speaking, you could be hired, yes. So once you're in the reserve list, you can be hired for any administratively relevant job. So if you pass an ASD3 competition, you can be hired for an ASD3 job by any institution. There is certainly an internal agreement, or you might call gentleman's agreement, or internal understanding between the institutions that if there's a dedicated competition for proofreaders where the ECJ and the European Parliament are looking for proofreaders, the European Commission are not going to poach those candidates from the reserve list. So again, legally you could be, but practically you will not be. But having said that, with time, usually after 2 to 3 years, you have, even according to the staff regulations, and then depending on vacancies, the possibility to transit into another job profile while keeping your administrative status. And that other job profile might be in another city or country for that matter. So not Luxembourg, but perhaps Brussels. Again, this is legally speaking possible. Now, the internal discussions, call it office politics, whether that makes it possible, that's a different matter. But at least from administrative terms, you should be able to do that. Next one, a master degree in linguistics. Does it count as professional experience? I don't think so, because a degree is a degree, and professional experience is actually a paid work. You are remunerated for a work that you performed. So having a degree, however relevant the profile is, linguistics, it will not be considered work experience in a formal sense. Next one, it's about talent screener, something I'll come back to because we will talk about the talent screener. And let me pick one more. Are you sanctioned if you apply to an open competition but not meet all the requirements? No. As long as you're truthful and you're honest in your declarations, you're never going to be punished. So if you, again, you're not going to falsify documents, at least I hope you won't, why would you be penalized for that? So if you think that your 2.5 years work experience might be considered actually 3 years, given the dates, and you truthfully make those declarations in good faith, you're not going to be punished. They might just say, well, you don't meet the formal criteria, you are not qualifying for this competition. And other than that, again, as long as you make those truthful declarations, I don't see any reason why it would be an issue. So you certainly want to convince them of certain facts. And when we get to the talent screener, which is a questionnaire that is part of the application process, there you need to make declarations and you need to make certain statements about your background, experience, and things you have dealt with. Again, as long as you make honest declarations there, you may not qualify, but it doesn't have any negative repercussion on you. As a general rule, you can apply for any number of EU competitions as you please, as long as you meet the formal criteria. So you apply for this competition, you may not qualify. If there's a similar one in a month, you can still apply. And again, even right now, there are different competitions running in parallel. You can apply for those as long as you meet the formal criteria and you also meet the subjective is not the right word, but the competition-based criteria, meaning you pass the different steps in the selection process. All right, so we'll come back to the many other questions that are flowing in. And just a few words about why this is a great opportunity. And I probably don't need to preach to the converted, but a couple of words why these jobs tend to be very attractive. Salaries are pretty good, and depending on what you compare it to, and on purchase price parity, this nice term in economics of how much is your money worth in a given place. So salaries for AST3 is around 3,700 euros. If you are relocated from another country, so you are eligible for the so-called expatriate allowance, there are different factors, whether you have family, kids, or your other aspects of your personal status. But that's roughly the amount you can expect to earn. And the reason I mentioned this PPP, the purchase price parity, because the job is in Luxembourg, of course, that needs to be taken into account. But still, this is an attractive salary for this kind of position. And again, if you are passionate about proofreading and the kind of things that the job entails, of course, there is much more than simply the salary, because there are various other benefits apart from the job satisfaction itself and having a permanent, long-term, open-ended contract and being an EU official, so the job security is important. You also have benefits in terms of health insurance, and then if you have children, then they can go to European school, and there are other perks that come with the job. Now, obviously, the main question now is how should you prepare? What does it require from you to get one of these jobs? So step one, of course, being familiar with the application process, and you fill out the EPSO profile, eligibility declaration, you pick your language 1 and 2 based on those considerations that I've shared with you. And then you submit your application in one of the 24 official EU languages. And then you actually fill out all the other things you need to fill out, and one of them being the talent screener. Now, be careful, because the talent screener, despite being part of the application process, it can only be filled out in English or French. So it cannot be filled in Estonian or Gaelic or Finnish or any other language. So it's English or French only. Deadline 23rd of March, as you already know. Don't leave it to the last moment, again, to emphasize that. But then comes perhaps the harder part is, what is it that you need to do to prepare? What about the talent screener? What is it? How can I optimize my answers in the talent screener? Before we get there, let me randomly pick a couple other questions from the ones coming in. Is it possible to indicate in the application qualification, a qualification that I will obtain in June? I would need to double check in the notice of competition, because they might say that you need to have whatever documents or proof points by the deadline for the application. So typically that tends to be the rule. So by the 23rd of March, you need to have all the documents in hand and not, say, by the end of the competition. So again, I would need to double check that. You can also look that up. So if something is in process right now, chances are it may not qualify as supporting documents. Again, I'm telling you sort of the general rule. What else? Here's a question. How easy is it to get hired if you have a bachelor in linguistics but no experience at all in the sector? I'm already working in the European Commission as a temporary agent, as an assistant to the director. Well, based on this very short description of your situation, to me it seems you're not eligible for the competition, because if you have a linguistics, a BA, Bachelor of Arts in linguistics, but you don't have relevant work experience, then that's not going to fly, it seems to me. Because depending on the two scenarios, I mean, in either case, you need to have 3, or in the other case, 6 years of work experience. So you have already a BA, that means you need to have 3 years of relevant work experience. But if you have none, I don't think that's going to qualify you for the competition. So make sure to check your background, whether you could prove that you've done relevant tasks in your job, and see accordingly. But based on this very brief description, it doesn't seem it's sufficient. All right, one more before we go into the talent screener part. It's how can we prove that we have 3 years of experience if we work as freelance translators, proofreaders, and we don't have a permanent job that proves our experience? Now, being a freelance is absolutely fine. So there's nothing wrong, or it's not going to make your application any weaker or less substantiated if you are not an employee, but you're a freelancer. Proving it might be a little more difficult, but again, you can prove you can create a list of the kind of documents and topics you've dealt with. You can make a detailed description of the kind of linguistic tasks that you have performed as a freelancer. You can even show a company register in which you're registered as a freelance translator, proofreader, or language editor. So anything that really proves what you're doing, perhaps your website. And of course, when it comes to the payment, you can say, well, I've been paying Social Security as a registered freelancer for at least 3 years. So you can, I don't know if that's the term, but triangulate the information and say, here are the proof points that I've actually been performing relevant tasks for that many years, and I've been paid for it, and I've been working as a freelancer. So I believe that given your status, this should entirely be possible, even if you are not an employee. All right, let me move back to the talent screener. And I know that there are a couple other questions. We'll come back to those in due course as well. I'm wondering how many of you have actually had to fill in a talent screener in any other context. I presume the vast majority of those listening to this presentation have not had the fortune or misfortune or the pleasure of dealing with a talent screener. It's a typical part of any so-called specialist competition. So whenever there's a specialist competition, whether it's sustainable agriculture, there's actually one going on right now, or some others that are coming up in chemicals policy, or for that matter, proofreaders, they, being the selection board and EPSO, requires you to fill out a so-called talent screener. Talent screener is a list of questions, open questions, that you need to answer truthfully and in detail. It's not a multiple choice. It's not a computer-based test. It's actually a long-form questionnaire. And there are a couple of ideas to, I see Vincenzo has had the pleasure to fill out several times, and also Eva. All right, that's fine. So if you have any tips or ideas to share with the others, I know that they are competitors, but perhaps they go for a different language. So you might want to share a few points there in the chat box, tell them what you've learned as you filled it out. But I'll tell you a couple ideas about the talent screener. We actually have a webinar dedicated just to the talent screener. And we also have some free resources, tips and tricks articles, and perhaps even an ebook on the talent screener itself. But a couple ideas. So talent screener is basically, as I said, an open questionnaire that you want to fill out accurately, truthfully, while also optimizing your answers and the scores that you will be given. So here are a few tips. First one is try to answer yes to as many questions as you can. Again, make sure that you're absolutely honest and in good faith in your declarations. You want to be positive if you have a certain experience, you've dealt with a certain kind of task. You try to say yes to as many questions as possible because the scores will obviously depend on those answers, but you need to back up with evidence. You need to make sure that whatever you declare has roots in reality. Provide lots of valuable information. So you can use bullet points, you can use different items in your list, but you want to back up the information with references and with very concrete ideas you put in there. You cannot just say, I dealt with a great variety with a great variety of texts, and I've done thorough proofreading over the years. That doesn't really cut it. It's too vague, it's not specific, there are no dates in it, there are no numbers, there are no concrete references. You can say I've proofread 148 documents, each of which was on average 5 pages long, and they dealt with environment and law and chemical policy. So you give very, very concrete ideas what you actually dealt with. Again, concrete versus abstract, a little bit to my previous point, that you want to be very specific in your replies. And if a question is relatively similar to a previous one in the talent screener, don't just copy paste items from the previous answer. So try to customize it and make the answer very relevant to that particular question, because the assessor, the person actually reading your answers, and it's a human that will read it, not a computer, will judge your responses on its merits. And they will say, well, do I give this person 0, 1, 2, or 3 points? Typically, that's the scoring for any given answer in the talent screener. And make sure, well, you're a proofreader, so you are certainly very aware of the form, the shape, the style that a text has. So make sure that it's very easy to read. So the editorial part, the layout, the bullets, the structuring of the information, all of that is properly taken care of, perhaps even more than in other competitions, given the very nature of this particular topic. And of course, no typos, please. So make sure that you live up to the standards that you want to present in your future job, because I'm pretty sure that those reading it will have really they will go through with a magnifying lens and with eagle eyes and say, okay, do I spot something, a grammatical mistake or a typo or anything like that? Because it probably counts double in your case, given the nature of the duties. Also, this is a little bit marketing or perhaps even sales when it comes to the talent screener. Think about what's in it for them, meaning for EU institutions to hire you as a proofreader. So when you say, I work as a freelancer and I've dealt with various political declarations through my clients, this could be beneficial for the institutions because I already have that sort of experience, which is very similar to the kind of text that the European Parliament deals with. So you want to connect your experience with what they are looking for. This is not a job application. This is not a cover letter. And yet you want to make sure that your professional background, your professional experience is connected to the kind of profile they're looking for. I'm very careful to use the word profile because they're not looking to fill in a particular job. They're not going to say, well, the European Court of Justice linguistic department is looking to fill in that particular post. But it's a kind of profile, a proofreader profile in one of these two institutions that they are looking for. So connect your expertise and your experience with the kind of persona they are seeking. And then what else? EU institutions and EPSO, they are very formalistic. So you probably want to use some terminology that they like, that they also apply. And try to get familiar with that. Again, maybe you want to read the style guide. Maybe you want to read a couple of official documents, or perhaps look at even the Commission's DGT, which is the Directorate General for Translation. They have a wealth of great linguistic information there that you might want to look at and a little bit familiarize yourself with the way they write, the way they think. And then if you want to have a great talent screener, as I mentioned before, we have that nice webinar, everything you need to know about EPSO's talent screener. You might want to check that out to optimize your performance. And then comes the pre-selection exam. But then again, before we get to it, let me handpick randomly a couple of questions. So here's one that I have not yet answered. If we answer many no at the talent screener, do you think we have less chance? It's hard to tell. It really depends on the number of yes in proportion to the no, and whether those yes answers actually give you maximal point for a given question. Then it's okay to have a couple of no's. So I'm not sure how many questions there are in this particular talent screener. I guess around 10, 12, something around that. If anyone has information, put that into the chat box, please, for everyone's benefit. But again, let's suppose that there are 12 questions and you have no as an answer for 4 or 5 of them, but for all the rest, you have absolutely yes answers with great proof points, very good presentation of the information, and you get maximal points. You can definitely pass with that sort of approach. So again, it really depends on the proportions, and it's not just simply a yes or no answer for any number of questions. All right, what else have I missed yet? In this competition, would help to have law background, a legal degree, experience in drafting agreements in English and Spanish would be considered relevant. No linguistic profile, though. I'm a bit hesitant there, but I'm kind of leaning towards no. So having a law background, legal background, is not exactly a linguistic exercise. It's not exactly a linguistic work experience. So it needs to be about, proofreading. And again, it depends a little bit. So that's why I'm not so determined whether it's a yes or no. But again, I'm a little skeptical. But again, to a large degree, it depends on what you actually did, and also how you present the information. So if you were a law clerk in a law office, and all you had to do for 3 years is to improve the linguistic, ultimately legal, but linguistic quality of drafted documents. So you had to proof it, you had to improve it, you had to make sure that it holds water and it is accurate, consistent, and all the other things that are needed for a well-drafted text. It might qualify as a linguistic exercise, even though no translation of any sort was involved. But again, this is not a translator's exam. This is a proofreader's exam, right? So if your job was essentially about correcting, improving text, you might be able to sell it. But if your work was purely about you individually drafting legal submissions, or working as a full-time lawyer, or going to a court, or working with state administration, I'm not sure that would qualify. What else? What does directly related exactly mean? I think that's what this means. So going back to the answer I just gave for a lawyer. So if it's directly related because you were essentially working on those legal documents, from a linguistic perspective, that's directly related. But if broadly you were working first and foremost as a lawyer, but the linguistic aspect was really just secondary or tertiary, I don't think that would qualify as directly related to the kind of tasks that this competition requires. So, and take that analogy for other situations, not just for lawyers, obviously, but depending on what your job actually entailed. Right, maybe one more question before I move to the pre-selection exam part. That I already said. So they're asking a lot of experience for an ASD post. Is this normal? Is it normal? For ASD, they always ask for experience. So they always want some relevant work experience. So that is normal. 3 years versus 6 years, again, it's relatively normal. So having a high school degree and then 6 years, or a university degree and then 3 years, I don't see anything particularly off in this competition. It's fairly standard. Maybe the use of a talent screener for an ASD competition is less common, but then again, proofreading is a special skill, a special knowledge, a special area. It's not general clerical tasks. It's not general, say, project management things. So again, it's very okay. So I wouldn't label this particular competition or the requirements as out of the ordinary. All right, let me go back. We have a couple of slides here on the pre-selection part. I would presume most of you are somewhat familiar with what a computer-based test means and the pre-selection tests. So the verbal, abstract, numerical reasoning tests. And then maybe I'll spend a minute or so on the language comprehension test, which is less well-known and less common. So the pre-selection CBT, computer-based tests, and the exams, they might be held as part of the assessment center, or they might be held before, depending on how many candidates there are. So if there's a large number of candidates, they usually use it as a pre-selection test. If there aren't so many candidates, then they just want you to pass with a minimal score, and it's part of the assessment center. So it depends on initially how many applicants there are for this particular competition, or more specifically, for a given language profile. Verbal reasoning, you'll have 20 minutes and 20 questions and 35 minutes. Again, I won't spend any particular time on how they are built up. You can take free practice tests on our website. EPSO has free practice tests on their website. There's a wealth of materials. We have tons of free webinars, methodology, and how to do it. So I encourage you to check those out. Numerical reasoning, 10 questions, 20 minutes. Again, fairly standard. Calculation, tables, data interpretation, and then finding the correct answer. Abstract reasoning, 10 questions, 10 minutes. That tends to be the most challenging for most candidates. But then again, we'll see with the scoring that there's a bit of flexibility there in this particular competition. And then comes the language comprehension, which is a computer-based test. So you have multiple choice options. It's not sort of writing an essay or very open-ended. And the interesting thing here is that you have 2 sets of questions, and each set has 12 questions each. So altogether 24 questions, and you have 60 minutes, which is pretty good. It's pretty good, but then again, time flies in those contexts where you need to read a text and you need to understand at a deeper level and then find the correct answer from among the offered options. And you basically have 30 minutes for each set of 12, and you need to still be relatively fast. But again, here you have a bit more time. And the way it works is you have a bit of verbal reasoning element to it. So logic, using logic in interpreting what is presented to you. But then you have also verbal comprehension. So do you understand the text that is presented to you? And then number 3, verbal fluency. So how well do you understand the text? What does the author think about a certain thing? So it's the broader context, perhaps a meta understanding of the text and not just the actual words and expressions that they want to make sure you understood. Good news is we actually have lots of tests on our website that you can practice. You can get familiar with the interface. So that is something you can definitely practice and be fully prepared in advance. Here's a scoring guide. So the verbal reasoning is a standalone. You need to have at least 10 points out of 20. And then the numerical and the abstract are combined. So that's pretty good, because if you're not very good at abstract reasoning, you can still make up for some of it in the numerical reasoning part. And you need to have 10 points out of 20 for the combined exercise. And then the language comprehension, you need to have a 28 out of 48, so a little more than half. I guess it's around 60% of score. That's the minimum score you need to reach in order to pass. So the pass mark is enough, but only for the numerical and the abstract reasoning test, right? So for the numerical and abstract reasoning, it's enough to get just a pass mark, which is 10 out of 20. But for the verbal and the language comprehension, you need to perform well. You need to be among the top candidates in order to pass to the next stage. So there you are truly competing with others. But for the numerical and the abstract, you just need to kind of show that you are able to pass with a minimum score, minimum being 10 out of 20. So with that, talent screener. So I said already quite a bit about the talent screener. And then comes the assessment center. That's sort of phase number two of in the competition, which comprises of different kinds of exams. And again, we won't spend a huge amount of time on that, given that we're nearing our 1 hour slot. But then typically in the assessment center, you have tasks like the ones you see on the screen, a case study exam, a competency-based interview, a situational competency-based interview, and then a proofreading test, which is actually doing the job as part of the exam and demonstrating you're able to reach a very high score. And that you actually need to do in language 1 and language 2. So language 1, one of those 6, and English or French as language 2. So that's part of the assessment center. These days, this is done online, and you can do that from anywhere. We have our beautiful studio right here that we make available to candidates. So if you want a space with our beautiful microphone and camera and lighting and everything else, you can hire this place. But obviously, you can do it from anywhere as long as certain basic technical and logistical criteria are met. With the scores for the assessment center, what you see on the screen, you have a minimum score, but then again, it's a competition, so you need to perform well enough to pass to the next stage compared to the other candidates. And then if everything goes well, and hopefully it will, you end up on the reserve list. And that is when the actual recruitment can happen, when an institution, or one of the 2 institutions in this case, can contact you and say, hey, we're happy to offer you an interview. And after the interview, most likely a job. So how to get the job? Practice consistently for long time, depending on where you are right now. Maybe you're a math genius and you don't need to practice numerical reasoning, but verbal reasoning and the linguistic test is something you need to brush up on. Prepare regularly, really. Learn test methodology, and this is a little test on the screen. Do you spot the typo? So you see, we built in already a test to sharpen your attention to all the details. So as you can see, the E is missing, and that qualifies you as a very good proofreader if you spotted that even before I mentioned it. And then persistence is key. Make sure really you can do a study group, practice regularly, a bit like a sports preparation where you cannot just prepare 2 days before a sports competition. You need to start well in advance and go ahead in a consistent manner. Do simulations. We offer you lots of those. Everything is available on our website in a number of languages. And even the language comprehension we have available in 13 languages. And hopefully that will help you. If it's not available in your language, I believe Estonian is not something we have right now, or at least not yet. You can pick, obviously, any other language, so you can practice the time pressure, the kind of answers you're required to answer, and all of that. We have webinars, as mentioned before, many other resources, tips and tricks, and ebooks, and our colleagues, Veronica and Lenka, are more than happy to assist you. So send us an email, send us a message through the customer support page, and we're happy to follow up. Obviously, it has no cost. Ask us any question, and we'll do our best to point you to the right resource or answer it directly. You can check out a Facebook group called EPSO Proofreader and Editor Exams. So that is available to share resources, ideas, and tips. You might want to check the EU test books which actually the assessment center one is a new one is coming out in 3 weeks. So if you get to that stage, you're welcome to check out the 2021 edition. And then here's the discount code, which I'm going to leave on the screen while I pick and choose a couple other answer or questions before we finish off in a minute or two. So here's one question that says, if I have no experience, we have no chance. I'm afraid that's correct. You need to have experience, relevant experience, as stated in the notice of competition. So otherwise, you will not qualify, you will not be eligible for this particular competition. For others, you may not need any experience, but for this one, it's as stated in the notice of competition. Then, can unpaid work at an NGO count as work experience for the purpose of applying, or does only paid experience count? Well, typically, EPSO or selection boards would say you need to have been remunerated for your work experience to count as a work experience. But I'm a bit hesitant because many NGOs would hire you and give you a meaningful job and relevant job, but not necessarily pay you. So again, that might be an exception if you work for a nonprofit and you were not paid, but it was still meaningful work experience. So again, if you really want to be sure, you probably want to contact the selection board and make sure that they tell you something about it. But again, the main rule is paid work is considered work. But there might be some exceptions from that principle. Where can I buy the latest edition of your 85 EPSO book? Seems sold out everywhere. Oops, okay, I didn't know that. But you might want to check with the publisher's website. It's called John Harper Publishing .co.uk, a fairly long link. So John Harper Publishing .co.uk. He would list the different bookstores where it's available. And if it's not, you might want to just send the publisher an email. He's very responsive. He will tell you where you can get that. Okay, are candidates in the reserve list ranked? That's a good question, and it used to be the case in large competition that they would do, I think they would call it tiers, tier 1, tier 2, etc. But this is not the case anymore. So all candidates are just listed there. There's no ranking any longer. So the recruiters from the institutions would not know what score you got. So they probably would see your EPSO profile or perhaps the assessment center evaluation sheet. But then again, it's not a ranking. It's more about giving them an idea about your profile. One last question before we finish off in respect of everyone's time. So last talent screener question is about another language certificate. Can we reply yes and declare we know French because we studied at university, or we don't have a certificate? I don't know how they define certificate, because if you studied in a given language at university, I think that should be proof enough that you know that language well enough to have studied it. Now, if they require a formal certificate like a DALF or DELE or any other Oxford, whatever, any other linguistic certificate, then you probably need to have that formal paper. But my assumption would be they would not require such a formal paper. Like, why would you need to sit another test and get a certificate if you actually have a degree that you obtained in a given language? So again, check whether they define certificate in the talent screener. All right, actually there's one more question. For numerical and abstract reasoning tests, the result is combined with the two results. Yes, so numerical and abstract is combined into one, that's right. But do you necessarily need to pass each test, or can you maybe fail the numerical reasoning and compensate with the score of the abstract reasoning? That's the good news. So you can totally fail the numerical and pass the abstract, but then you need to pass the abstract with full score. So 10 out of 10 and numerical 0. Given that it's combined, you need to get 10 points out of 20, and that should be good enough. But again, the more you lose on one end, the more you need to make up for it on the other. But you can definitely fail, so to say, air quotes, one of the two because the scores are combined. With that, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much to Lenka and Veronica for helping me present whatever I covered today. And hopefully it was helpful, relevant, and useful. Please make sure to spread the idea of this webinar. If you have friends or colleagues who are interested, very happy to help them as well. And if you have any follow-up questions, send us a message through our contact form on eutraining.eu. We're more than happy to assist you. If there is something we're not sure about or we don't know, we'll honestly tell you, making sure that you get the most relevant, reliable information. But in some cases, we're not the authority that can decide, then we'll just let you know accordingly. So with that, hopefully it was relevant and interesting. And please take the preparation seriously, because it's not that many places, still enough to give you a very good chance at getting these positions, but take it seriously and work hard, and you're going to reach your dream job and your goal of becoming a proofreader at the EU. So with that, thanks again, and to be followed. Recording will be sent to you along with the presentation and the transcript as well. Have a nice day.